Hey everyone, what's up? I'm Kozuro, a traditional and digital artist who's been drawing on Photoshop for quite a while now. And today I welcome you to this video in which I will explain to you in details how you can use Photoshop to create your own art pieces. So this video will be divided in 4 parts. First, the intro and what format you could choose, or at least what format I use. Then the most important tools and how layers work. A third part in which I will make a little drawing so that you can see how I use everything I explained here. And finally a shortcuts recap with my favorite shortcuts. Alright, so let's dive into it. First, when you open Photoshop, you should have something like this, but without all these, because these are my personal files. And you can click here on Create, or just use Ctrl N to create a new canvas. Also, don't worry about the fact that my Photoshop is in French. I couldn't find how to change it, but I will explain everything in English. Then we're going to talk about the format. Concerning this part, there are many viable options out there, but what I use is a 72 pixels per inches resolution and canvases with a lot of pixels, as you can see here. But this really depends on your computer's capabilities, and you should inform yourself on how much it can handle to choose the right format that works for you. So once you are in Photoshop, you can see all your tools on your left, and here you have your panels, and the one that you will pick first is your color panel. You can also click down on the left here to choose your color. And obviously the first tool that I'm going to talk about is the brush tool. The brush tool is the basic tool that you can find on any drawing software and that will allow you to draw on your canvas. The shortcut to pick it is the B key. There are many things that you can do to modify your brush, and for example you can have brushes presets. These are just tools to make you win some time, but you do not need them. I'll also probably make a dedicated video to talk about my favorite custom brushes. Once you have your brush, you can right click to change the size of it, but you can also hold Alt, right click, and here you can go right to make it bigger or left to make it smaller, just like this. Plus you can adjust its hardness depending on what you need, so the closer to 0 the softer it will look. Also, you can change the opacity of your brush here, so the lower the opacity, the more transparent your brush strokes will be. If it's not activated, you can click on this button right here to make it so that if you press harder with your pen, it will become more opaque, and if you press less hard, it will become less opaque. Just like that, and you can make gradients. The other button right here is to make it so that the harder you press, the bigger your brush strokes will be. And it also works the other way around, so the softer you press, the thinner your lines. Also, if you've got your brush selected, you can use the color picker by pressing the Alt button. So just let your Alt button clicked, and see, I can take the white or the red. Just like that. And one more thing, just like in almost any computer program, if you press Ctrl Z, it will undo your last action. And it's what I've been doing since the start of this video. You can also press Ctrl Shift Z to redo your last action. Now that I've covered the basics of what the brush tool can do, the next contestant on our list is the eraser tool. You can select it by pressing E. And it's basically the same tool as the brush tool with the opacity and the size thing. It also uses the same shortcuts for the size. And what the eraser does is it erases. Yeah, alright, next tool. Nah, but for real, I don't know what else to say about this one. Just try it out for yourself and you'll understand how it works. Okay, so earlier on, we talked about the color picker tool, right? And this color picker is related to this color wheel here with the triangle. So with the triangle, you can pick your color here, obviously by clicking on it, and then you can change the hue here. So, or like this. For example, here you have yellow, blue, etc. The saturation here, and your light here. So basically, how much black there is in your color. So the lower, the more black there is. And for the saturation, the less saturation there is, the more white there will be in your color. Okay, let's move on to the next tool now. So the next tool I want to talk about, and to me, one of the most useful tools that there are on Photoshop, is the Lasso tool or the Select tool. So there are two types of selection tools I use, which are the Lasso tool and the polygonal lasso tool. The normal lasso tool makes it so that you can freely select a part of your drawing, just like this for example, and make some adjustments in this zone. So basically, if you select a part of your drawing, you can only draw in this selection. So this is very handy because I cannot draw out of it. Also, once you have your pixels selected, you can press on the delete key on your keyboard and it will delete every pixel in that zone. You can also erase manually and not erase outside. And once you have this selection, you can unselect it by right-clicking and clicking the first option. You can also reverse it, so basically select everything outside of this zone by clicking on the second option, just like that. And for example, I can erase. And if you want to hide this little outline, you can click on Ctrl H, but you will still have your selection. And if you want to show it again, just click Ctrl H. Easy, isn't it? Also, a very useful thing is if you want to add pixel to your selection, just hold Shift with your lasso tool and then select what you want to add. If you want to remove some parts of your selection, just do the exact same thing but hold Alt instead of Shift, and that's it. The polygonal lasso tool is basically a lasso tool but that makes straight lines. Also, if you want to modify your selection, just click on transform the selection and you can move it around, make it bigger, smaller, etc. And if you want to modify the pixels inside of it, click manual transformation and you can do the same thing. And then if you right click, you've got all this panel of things you can do. So these first three, I never use them. Then you've got, I believe, what is called twist in English. This is basically to modify your shapes. Let's say, for example, you've got a face right here, you know? Let's say this is a face. And you've got your eyes here. But you think this face is not wide enough. Well, you can use Ctrl T, right click, and use twist to make it a bit wider. Then there is the perspective tool. It's kinda hard to use, but basically it allows you to use perspective in a very simple, in a very restricted way. I mean, you cannot create perspective really with this only. Sometimes you have to modify the image directly, but it can be useful sometimes. And finally, one of the most useful ones to me, it is deformation. And then finally, there is what I believe is called deformation in English. This option here. This allows you, if you click on these points here or those ones, to be able to modify your image just like this. Let's say I want to make the chin a little more to the right. I can do this, and now I want it to be even, so let's do this. And you can see you can really warp, I'd say, your shape. Then just press enter and there you go. Another very useful thing is horizontal symmetry, like this. Just turns around on the horizontal axis, and and vertical. Same thing, but vertical. Okay, so the next tool I want to talk about is an essential tool, and it is the layer tool. To create a new layer, you can press Ctrl Shift N. Here you can rename it, blah, 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 and it will show off here. So here you have all your layers, and basically if I paint on a layer that is under another layer, the layer above it will have the priority. So here you can see that the light blue is over the dark blue. Let's rename these layers. You can rename your layer on double clicking on its name, and if you hold your left click on your layer, you can move it around. And if I put it under my dark blue layer, my dark blue layer is now above my light blue layer, and so its pixels will show above it. You can also click on this little eye here to show or hide your layer, and you cannot paint on your layer if it's hidden. Now, one thing that you really don't want to do is paint on your background layer. Nobody does it, and just don't ask why. Just don't do it. Something else that you can do with your layer is lower its opacity. And if you do that, each and every pixel of this layer will have less opacity. So if you click on the opacity here, you can go left or right to decrease or increase the opacity. Or you can click here like this, or even just type the opacity you want here. Something else that is very useful is this little tool here. So if you click on it with your dark blue layer and pick any color, basically, it means that you cannot paint outside of your layer's pixels. And it will also keep the opacity of your pixels. So basically, if I just go like this and pick my dark blue color and make a zone that has less opacity, then take my brown color, lock my pixels, and fill it in, you can see that here it is less opaque than here. So it keeps the opacity. So one other very useful tool you can use is what we call the clipping mask. So by right-clicking on your layer here, you can create a clipping mask, or you can just press Ctrl-Alt-G. With this layer, which is called clipping mask, and which is clipped on the brown layer, you can only draw on the pixels that are on the brown layer. It's kind of hard to explain, but here I'll show it to you. So I'm currently painting on my clipping mask layer, but you can see I cannot go out of the pixels that are on my brown layer. It also remembers the opacity of your layer underneath, but I will show you an example on how I use these types of layers to make a drawing later on, so you can understand it better. So next on the list are layer modes, I guess. I don't know how it's called, but basically it's this button here, and it's different for each and every layer. So basically, if this layer is normal, I can individually select this one as this is multiply, for example, but this one is still normal, you can see here. And I will explain to you some of those modes. So there is the normal one, which you will use most of the time, and the ones that I use the most are the multiply, which will basically multiplies the luminosity of the base color by the blend color. But you do not need to understand what this means, because to be fair, I don't either. To make it simple, every pixel on your layer will darken the colors which are on your underneath layers. So you can see here, it will darken the pixels below depending on what color you picked. Here on the dark blue, well, it makes even darker blue, and on white it's basically your base color. And you can do this on every layer that is underneath it. And once again, you need to pay attention to your layer placement, because if my light blue color, which is not even light blue, is above my multiply layer, the normal type layer will take over. So this layer mode can be very useful to make shadows, for example. I will show you later. So the next layer modes I want to talk about are screen, color dodge, overlay, and hard light. To be honest, I don't exactly know what these ones do, but they are a fancy way to draw lights. But make sure not to abuse them because it can look really weird sometimes, especially if you stack layers with different modes. So yeah, you can just experiment with these types of layer and see which one you like the best. Also, some handy tips. If you right click on your layer, you can fuse it with the layer that is underneath, just like this. And basically here you can see I can erase the pixels that are on both layers. If you have multiple clipping masks above one single layer, you can click on this layer to fuse every and each one of your clipping masks with this option here, just like that. You can also dupe your layer like this, for example. And if you want to delete your layer, just select it and press your delete button. Or you can right click and click here. Two last things about layers and we will be done with the hardest part of this video probably. You can create a group of layers. So for example, if I click on this one, it will create a group above it here with this button. And it's basically like folders. So if you put your light blue underneath your group 1, it will put it in it, and same with this zubidibidibidi layer. And then you can choose to display your layers or not, and you can hide every layer that is in this group. You can also create a clipping mask that will clip on the group. So here you can see I can paint only on the pixels of the layers that are in this group, which can be very handy if you have a lot of layers, which I don't recommend, by the way. And the last thing, and probably the most advanced tool I will talk about in this video, is the fusion mask. Or at least that's what I call it because it's called like that in French, but I really don't know its name in English. You can just click here on this button that looks like the Japanese flag, just like this. And it basically creates a layer attached to your basic layer, and it has special properties. If you paint black on it, so for example here I paint with black, and you can see here it is displayed here, it will basically hide the pixels of the mask that it is attached to. You can also use gray, which will only lower its opacity, and if you paint in white, it shows the pixels, just like this. This can be useful in many cases. Also, if you want to delete it, you can click here and click on delete. Or if you want to apply it, for example, you can click on apply the fusion mask, and it will basically show off as your light blue layer on which you can paint. Now let's talk about adjustment layers. First things first, you can select a layer that you want to modify and click on Ctrl U, and here you can change its hue right here, its saturation right here, and its brightness here. And you can also choose to modify only reds, only yellows, etc. So here for example we only have blue, and you can modify only your blue color. So one adjustment layers that does the exact same thing is this one here, hue and saturation. You can create a clipping mask by clicking on this button here so that it only affects this layer, and do the same thing as I showed just before. And you can see it automatically creates a fusion mask. Yeah, if you want to modify your adjustment layers properties, you can click here, and this is for every adjustment layers. So for example, let's say I use this, and then with your clipping mask you can go back to normal if you want by using black and white to apply. Also, this is a little bit more advanced stuff. You do not need to use this to be able to create great paintings, which brings me to the next adjustment layers I want to talk about. which are first levels. This is a bit more of an advanced one, so you can just watch the timestamps on the video to just skip it if you want. So the left one on here is the amount of black that you will have in the colors of the layers that are under this layer. This is for the whites, and here it's basically, I'd say, the balance. You can click here to hide or show so that you can see if it's better or not with more or less contrast. So these are the two adjustment layers that I use, but there are many more that you can try out if you want, but they are not that useful. Okay guys, now's the part of the video where I make a very small drawing so that you can see how I use every tool I showed you when I draw. Then I will show you how to save your painting in different formats, and finally I will make a quick shortcut recaps with my favorite shortcuts. This part of the video will mostly be in a sped up format, so if you want to see what I'm doing, you can slow down the video in the YouTube settings if you want to. But keep in mind that I will make a dedicated video on my process to paint on Photoshop, so do not bother trying to look too much in details. So now let's say that you want to save your drawing. What you gotta do is go in Files up here and click on one of those two. You can also click Ctrl S to save. Choose any folder you like. Change the name here, and if you click here you can choose the format. Usually if you want to post it on Instagram or any social media, you would use a PNG file or JPEG, but you can just save it as a Photoshop. So this will show even if you click Ctrl S the first time you save, because he wants you to choose a folder. Let's say I save it and you click Ctrl S, it will automatically save on the file that you chose, so it will update the file. So if you want to make another file, you need to click Ctrl Shift S or Save As, and here you can save another copy. You just need to change the name and, for example, the format, and there you go. And here are some bonus tools I didn't talk about in the video because they are not essential to be able to draw, but they can be very useful. So yeah, this is to thank you for watching till the end of the video, I guess. First, the bucket tool. You can use it by pressing G, and it will basically automatically fill the area that you selected. So basically if you have one blank canvas, you can just fill it with your color. If you have a selected part of your drawing, you can fill it with another color. If you have two very distinct colors, you can fill one of those with another color. For example, here I filled the gray with the bucket tool. And finally, a very useful tool is the smudge tool. But you gotta pay attention, because if you have a lot of pixels on your canvas, your computer will absolutely explode if you abuse this. Basically it will, well, smudge your colors together. So this can be very useful, but do not use it everywhere. Use it sometimes with awareness, because this can make your drawing look like really dirty or kind of muddy. You also need sharp angles, not only gradients like this. To conclude this video, here's a quick recap of my favorite shortcuts. You have, of course, B to use your brush, Alt with your brush to color pick, E to erase, Ctrl S to save, Ctrl Z to undo, Ctrl Shift Z to redo, L for lasso tool, Ctrl H to hide your selection, Shift to select more, and Alt to erase selection, G for the bucket tool, Ctrl Shift N for a new layer, Ctrl Alt G to create a layer mask, Ctrl U to modify your mask, Ctrl T to move or modify your entire layer, and Alt right click to make your brush bigger or smaller. Okay guys, that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching it till the end, and I hope it was useful to you. Don't hesitate to give me your opinion in the comments, and also don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you think my content is useful or if you like it. Hoping to see you in my next video, but until then, see ya!